scientific consensus is that we are causing global warming. I am Al Gore. I used to be the next president of the United States of America. The 10 hottest years ever measured, they've all occurred in the last 14 years. And the hottest of all was 2005. Our ability to live is what is at stake.
Did you notice in that there's little graphics appearing on the screen in that trailer from An Inconvenient Truth saying nothing is scarier than the truth? That really applies to Al Gore because we've got yet another study showing that the Earth isn't really warming. This one comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States. And joining me to help explain all of this is Dr. Tim Ball, an actual climate scientist and a man who's been saying, hold on a minute, I think some of your theories are a little messed up. Tim, great speaking to you again. Tell us what's going on with the NOAA and what they're saying.
Well, of course, the NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, is the weather office for the United States. It's the equivalent of Environment Canada. And, of course, they got caught up, all of these national weather agencies got caught up in the political science of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Our friend Maurice Strong, the Canadian, organized the IPCC through the World Meteorological Organization, which meant that those agencies got inveigled into it. And, of course, the politicians were listening to them. They set about to prove that human CO2 was causing global warming initially and then laterally climate change. The problem is that the science didn't fit that and the evidence didn't fit that. But it was a political agenda and it had all the force of that. And Al Gore exploited it more than anybody.
So one of the things that came out in this NOAA study, State of the Climate in 2012, was that the melting of the ice in the Arctic region has stalled, but also that the Antarctic ice reached a record level. Let me quote from it. It says the Antarctic maximum sea ice extent reached a record high of 7.51 million square miles on September 26. So in the north, any melting had stopped, and on the South Pole, they've never seen as much ice. I'll tell you what, I was just up on an Alaskan cruise with Ezra Levant, and we went through Glacier Bay National Park. The National Park Rangers, the government employees of the U.S., were saying that the glaciers were receding and it's all due to man-made global warming. The local native guide that was also brought on with the park ranger said, our people have seen these glaciers recede in advance 4 times. He didn't seem bothered by it at all.
No, and of course they don't want to hear what the native people have to say because, of course, the whole thing about the environmental movement is, oh, we've got to go back and live like they did. They don't want to go back and live like they did. And a similar event occurred, by the way, with the ice, with the polar bears. They had a conference on polar bears in Toronto a couple of years ago, and the Inuit were told not to show up, as was Mitch Taylor, who's the world expert on polar bears, because the Inuit were saying we've never seen so many polar bears. And when you look at climate and when you talk to the elders, they know that the climate varies all of the time. Their awareness of it is much better than Environment Canada or any of the so-called scientists locked in academia.
I want to show the audience a couple of pictures. In the first one, it was taken by Associated Press, and it showed the North Pole monitoring station, and it was a sea of water. And this was described. This is it in winter, completely covered. Now we can show the one where they said this is a lake at the North Pole because of all the melting, and they said this was due to global warming. Associated Press had to retract this photo and the story that went with it. Fill us in on what happened there.
Well, what happened was that, of course, this was another of those nice sensational stories. We saw it about 4 or 5 years ago when the New York Times had pictures of open water, I should say, at the North Pole. Well, there's always been open water at the North Pole from year to year. It depends upon the wind conditions, and it depends on the situation. Water on top of the ice is not new either. It's called freshets. And, of course, when you get the melting in the summer, And temperatures can get quite high in the Arctic because you've got 24 hours of daylight. No, even though the sun is low on the horizon, you've got a long day. And so ice conditions and the open water and water on the ice are perfectly normal, perfectly natural, and nothing new. But, of course, if you're looking for a story and you want to scare people who don't understand and don't know that this is perfectly natural and nothing unusual, then you can just simply say, oh, here's water at the North Pole. Oh, my goodness. It's like it never happened before. But this is the game they play with all of these things. AP got caught, as did the story about open ice at the North Pole.
Well, speaking of that, a few years ago, BBC ran a sensational story that is laughable today, but was taken quite serious then. And they said that the Arctic would be ice-free by the summer of 2013. We're almost out of the summer of 2013, Tim, and as I said, I wasn't quite in the Arctic, but I was close, and there was still ice, and the glaciers are beautiful and magnificent.
Yeah, well, of course, the story about being ice-free was reported by the BBC, who are one of the most alarmist of the media outlets, and getting fed their information by the UK Met Office, whose forecasts, by the way, are consistently and absolutely wrong. But they wanted to play up on the fact that the ice was disappearing because that was a major feature in Al Gore's movie. And so it wasn't just the BBC reported the story. The story actually originated, one of the major scientists that were saying it was with NASA. And, of course, NASA has also been very much involved in hyping these stories. Jim Hansen, who is the director of climate at the NASA GIS, that's where that story originated from. And yet now we see, as you said, this summer, the Arctic ice is back to the normals for the year, or for the decade of 2000. And, in fact, the ice has started to freeze already 2 weeks ahead of the average date of it freezing. So, it's all part of the hype. But the good news about all of this, Brian, is, of course, it's that kind of extremism that when it blows up in their faces, and they have to get more extreme as Mother Nature doesn't play games with, or doesn't go along with their game, it exposes the falsity of what they're doing, which, of course, is why we're doing this program. And my concern is, of course, at a certain point, science is going to lose credibility. People will say, well, we don't believe anything you tell us.
Well, don't believe the political scientists. Let's put it that way. There's no joy in saying I told you so, but you can say it. You can say it, Tim. I told you so.
Thank you. I can say it, but there's no pleasure in it.
Thanks so much. Email me your thoughts on all of this. Byline@sunmedia.ca. Stick around.